No, good to go. Obviously, we get, you've been doing equity release for 2 years now. Was it Age Partnership
Yes, yeah. So I spent 2 years at Age Partnership.
Yeah, and was it how many hundred equity releases have you done now?
Well, yeah. So in terms of applications, it's got to be in the region of about 200 equity release applications, and probably somewhere in the region of about 400 equity release research and recommendations, really. So a lot.
Yeah, busy. That sounds good.
Yeah.
But
I think this marketplace it's been massive for the last couple of years. You can even see that from a kind of a broker perspective in terms of the amount of brokers that are catching on to the growth of the marketplace and going out there and getting the qualification. But then you only need to look at the stats for the customers. Up until last year, it was double-digit growth in the market probably for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, that's strong going, especially, I guess, with options limited, especially currently, it's people are, I guess, considering alternatives like equity release, where previously maybe it probably wasn't sort of the forefront of people's minds.
No, yeah, I think it's definitely. I think the growth of the marketplace now means it's definitely a consideration in that later life lending space, and there's still lots of innovation going on, but I think the appeal of equity release for some people, it definitely comes as part of something they're thinking about when looking at their options.
No, but so we get asked quite a bit. It's quite surprising, actually. A lot of people don't know what equity release is, how it works and what the charges are. So can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, so I mean, equity release is, I always say, it's what it says on the tin, really. It's kind of releasing equity out of your kind of home. There's a couple of different types. So you've got your normal lifetime mortgages and then home reversion plans. So there's a couple of different options, but ultimately it's releasing equity without necessarily having any committed payments unless you wanted to. The funds that you take can be used for any legal purpose, really. So there's no kind of restrictions. The lenders still want to know what it's going to be used for, but they're not going to say no. I always used to say to people, you could take the money and go put it all on black in Vegas. Not that anyone would tell you to do it, but if you wanted to do it, you could. But what happens is you take the money and you don't have to pay for it per month. But what the lender will then do is add the interest on top of the loan. And I think the cost is probably the biggest thing with equity release, where people are, if you don't know much about it and you kind of start talking about things like that, it can be a bit of a worry, because with that interest, it is compounded interest. So, as every year goes by, the interest is being charged on the interest, and it runs until you either pass away or go into care. The last person passes away or goes into care, and then the property is normally sold and the loan is then repaid.
Okay. And is there a sort of a minimum age requirement, or what's the sort of specific requirement so you can release it?
55 is the youngest that you can kind of do equity release, but then what ties in with the younger you are, the less that you can take. So how it's all worked out, it's always the age of the youngest person and the property value, and that will then determine the maximum that you can have. So it's based on a percentage of the property.
Fine. And if the property is worth more than the equity release itself, is the outstanding amount of the property passed down on a will, or is that?
Yeah, so like, let's say you live for 20 years and you sold your house for 500,000 and you owe 200,000 pounds on the equity release, then whatever's left once the equity release is paid off is then passed, as per your will would normally state. It's just the same as any other loan, really, involving, when it comes to property, it's the same as normal mortgages. So once everything's redeemed and there's no more liabilities outstanding, whatever is left is just divided as per your will.
Fine. And obviously, we've got a wonderful Brexit coming up. Is it still possible to release equity and buy abroad after Brexit, or do you reckon they'll be impacted by it?
I think it's going to be an impact. It's definitely going to be, with the whole, I think the freedom of movement is where it's going to kind of come into, really. That's it. Beforehand, I know some countries had certain restrictions for UK citizens buying abroad anyway. There's certain tax implications and all those kind of things. But I think the freedom of movement is going to make it slightly more difficult. I imagine people are probably going to have to do a bit more research into it. But I don't think it's going to be impossible. I imagine there's still going to be things that people can do, visas, and I think it's just going to a few more hoops to jump through to make it possible, but it's not going to be out of the question.
And I think that'll be, I think the biggest issue at the moment with finances. I mean, so many people getting furloughed, redundancies. I think equity release could be quite important in the coming months, especially if, as you said, over 55s ready to, in that sort of position.
I think, yeah, if you're going to, potentially you're going to get, over 55s if they're going to be in that position where they're being made redundant, or, you can meet a lot of people, if you're over 55 and your job's at risk, lots of people might even consider voluntary redundancy. And that's, again, when equity release may come into it, because people might be thinking about that they've always wanted to go and live abroad. So, what are their options? And it becomes a conversation at that point, really. I think the people that want to move abroad, that are spending the time thinking about it, I don't think it will stop them, because they're putting the legwork in there. It's something they're seriously wanting to do, and if it means they've got a few more hoops to jump through, as long as the costs aren't too big, then I'm sure they'd still be interested in doing it. I think maybe for the people that it's always been a nice thing to think about, oh, I'd love to go and own a flat in Spain or something like that. I think maybe those with Brexit and visas and things might then be put off, but I still think it's going to be a big, big marketplace for people that are still seriously interested in it.
I agree with you. I think if someone's got the ambition to buy property overseas, they'd be happy to sort of, jump through a few more hoops, and if they have to pay either a visa or travel insurance or whatever, then they'll be happy to.
It's no different looking at the people that move to places like Australia and the US, where these visas are required. There's certain things in place that you need anyway, and if you've got that drive and it's something you've always wanted to do, and you've had that dream of going to Australia, then those visas and things are something that you just take on board. It doesn't stop you, it doesn't put you off. It's just something that as part of the process, and I think that will become probably a bit more of the new norm for us with Europe. It's just going to be part of the process of looking to move to these countries.
Yeah, so just people adapting to the new processes and taking it on board and carrying on as a word. In terms of the current pandemic, what happens if property prices drop and you enter negative equity? How does that affect equity release?
I mean, with equity release, if you're still living, it doesn't have any impact at all. Nothing changes with that. You've had the money. There's no requirement to pay anything back. Things just carry on as they are. So the lender can't just take the house back or anything like that. If you fall into negative equity and you're still living, I think it'd be a bit more of a bigger impact if somebody passes away in negative equity, because all the products come with what's called the no negative equity guarantee, it just states, as long as the property is sold for the best possible price it can be, if there's not enough to repay the debt, then that's all the lender can have. So, if your house is worth 200 at the time and you owe them 300, then all the lender's going to get is 200, and that's it. No debt is ever passed on to family members.
Fine. And the remaining 100,000 is just clear bad debt.
Yeah, written off. It's the thing with these lenders, a lot of these lenders in equity release have been doing it for many, many years anyway. They've got very smart people in the background that do their calculations to determine likelihood of length of life, interest rates, likelihood of getting their money back. So you'd imagine that the lender, with the risk, they probably feel like it's unlikely to fall into negative equity, but obviously the risk is always going to be there. Nobody knows what's going to happen with house prices.
Absolutely. I think if you read at the moment, there's so many mixed reports. Some people are saying prices will jump, but some saying prices will drop. So,
we've had probably in the last 2 weeks alone, we're getting buy-to-let landlords that are coming out that have got portfolios and are saying, I want to release money out of my portfolio now, whilst the value is considered okay, because I think the house prices are going to drop later on in the year, and I want to have the cash to be able to buy another property. So there's people out there that are kind of trying to use both sides of the coin, really. While it's okay now, we're going to take the money, and when house prices, we expect them to drop, we're going to buy another one. So I think, it's interesting to see how people are reacting to it.
I guess the next 2-3 weeks will give us a clearer picture, depending if you go into a second lockdown or not. It looks like we're headed in that way at the moment.
Yeah, and I'm kind of praying that we don't. To be fair, we worked throughout the first one. It's just Yeah, it wasn't impossible, but yeah, it's a lot harder. But even now, things aren't fully back to normal. We've just kind of adjusted. Dealing with the new norm, forgetting kind of to a degree, you almost forget about 90% loan to value with the lack of available options.
So what is the current minimum, just out of interest?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of products at 10% by literally two lenders. You've got some lenders that might pop back in for a day or two with a new product for first-time buyers. I think the two that are available at the moment are purely for first-time buyers. So if somebody's sold a house, moved into rented or something, want to buy again, you tend to be looking 15% is where the majority of the marketplace sits.
Fine, just to cover the risk element of it, I assume, with everything's going.
Yeah, I mean, it's the lender protect themselves. If house prices drop, then they've got a bit more of a buffer to protect themselves.
No, sounds good. I think on the equity side of things, this will be very good. Obviously, we'll use this and pass it down to as many, have it on our website, and obviously any clients that request equity information, are you happy for us to pass your email number to them for you to get in touch?
Yeah.
To get in touch with you.
Yeah. Happy to have a chat with anyone about it, really, because you tend to see a lot of people with equity releases. They've got a lot more equity in the property than somebody that's looking to just buy a normal house. So they with the money, there's probably more options. Lenders are still lending, money is still available. Interest rates still are still at a competitive level. We're not talking like we were a few years ago with the rate. So I think it's, with all of this, even if we did go into another lockdown, I imagine equity release is still going to remain as popular.
That sounds good. And any clients that we come across or anyone that requests the information, we'll be sure to get in touch with you.
Yeah, talk them through their options.
Sounds good. Thank you, Corey.
No worries. Thanks very much.